Hello and welcome back to the British English Podcast. I'm Charlie, your host, and happy new year. Welcome to 2026. Now, if you're a B2 level speaker of English, maybe pushing the C1 level, this episode is specifically for you. Because if you've been stuck at that level for a while, then I think this one will really, really change things. Because you probably understand most things you hear. You can work in English, you can hold conversations, but you still hesitate. You still play it safe, and your English doesn't quite feel like you yet. And what I've noticed is that most B2 learners don't need more English. They need to use English differently. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Not grammar rules, not vocabulary lists, but the actual study habits that move you from a B2 to a strong C1 or even a C2 within a year. I'm going to walk you through exactly what I'd recommend you do as a B2 learner starting this year afresh. And just so you know where I'm coming from, I'm not a polyglot. I'm not speaking from my own language learning journey. What I'm obsessed with is the psychology of learning. And after working with thousands of B2 to C1 English learners over more than 10 years now, I've started to see patterns of what actually works and what doesn't, and where people get stuck. And that's what I'm here to talk about today. But before I jump into the specific strategies, I want you to understand something important about the B2 level, upper intermediate. At this level, most learners struggle with activation rather than knowledge. Not all, but a lot. The majority. So you might already know a lot of English. You might be able to recognize things when you hear them, but you can't produce them naturally when you speak. You might be able to understand podcasts, but you can't express your ideas with the same flow. So what I'm going to talk about is focusing on primarily bringing the passive English into active English. So here's how to make that happen. All right, so the first one is I think you should be collecting phrases and collocations, not just words. So at this level, vocabulary usually isn't the main problem. Most B2 learners already know plenty of words. The real issue is how words combine in natural English. It's about collocations, the way words naturally go together. Instead of learning single words, I want you to start collecting things like stance phrases, such as what I mean is this, or the way I see it is that, or softeners. That's another one. Like just before stating something, you might say, that said, I think this is a good idea. Or to be fair, I see what you mean there. Another one is discourse markers, saying like, oh, I get where you're coming from, or that's a fair point, but you see, it's not like specific advanced vocabulary. It's phrases that natives are using in their everyday language. So instead of learning a fancy word for like the word important, like vital or crucial, you want to be noticing how natives actually express themselves using less fancy vocabulary, like what really matters here is blah, 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 or the main thing for me is blah, blah, blah. So this is what makes English sound more natural. And I'd say if you notice some of these kind of phrases or clauses, I'd like you to try to challenge yourself to use it within 48 hours. So in conversation, in your speaking practice, in your output work, somewhere, anywhere, try to get active with that, what you've just learned, within 48 hours. Because going beyond this B2 level isn't about sounding really clever. It's about using very normal language in very natural ways. And once you start thinking in phrases instead of words, your English starts to feel a lot easier. And it might help you stop translating, because if you're thinking of a sentence in your native language and then you're swapping out each word as it goes, then that is very time consuming and exhausting. But if you're learning these set phrases that natives use, you're molding your thoughts around the sentence structure that a native naturally uses. And once you're collecting phrases, something else becomes clear pretty quickly. It's not just what you say in English that matters, it's when, where, and how you say it. This is where a lot of B2 and even C1 learners feel stuck without really knowing why. Because they're grammatically correct, but they sometimes sound too direct, too formal, or a bit emotionally flat. So start paying more attention to how English changes depending on the situation. For example, the way you disagree with a friend is not the same as disagreeing in a meeting, or giving an opinion in a presentation is different from giving feedback one-to-one, even at work. So I would recommend that you regularly take one simple idea and practice expressing it in different circumstances. Say it casually, as if you're talking to a friend down the pub. Then say the same thing again, but in a more neutral or professional way. And then try a more careful, polite version, maybe for an email or a sensitive conversation. The idea stays the same, only the tone changes. And this is where those phrases you've been collecting already really start to earn their place. And they help you soften things, or what we call hedge your opinions. An example of hedging might be saying like, it is too expensive versus, I think it might be slightly out of budget. That's hedging. It's kind of similar to softening, but slightly specific. And Brits do this a lot. So this kind of practice does two things. First, it stops you sounding robotic or overly direct. And second, it gives you confidence because you're no longer guessing whether what you're saying is appropriate for the situation. And I think that's a really powerful one to try and overcome. Now, once you're more comfortable adjusting your tone for different situations, there's something else worth focusing on. And I'm going to be honest with you here. You probably should, see, I'm hedging what I'm stating. You should probably stop worrying about your accent. Not because pronunciation doesn't matter. It really does matter. But at this level, chasing a perfect British or American accent is often a massive, massive distraction. You don't need to sound like you grew up in London or California. Because if you sound slightly like you're not, but you're trying that, then it feels very confusing for a native. And to try and achieve a real local accent is really time consuming for a lot of people. So unless you love it, then I wouldn't focus your attention on that at this stage. What you should work on instead is rhythm, because most of the time when somebody sounds noticeably non-native, it's not their accent, it's the melody of their voice, the sentence and syllable stress, the pausing, then the speeding up, and then the ups and downs at the start or end of a statement or question. So here's what I'd recommend. Take short clips from things you're already listening to, maybe 20 seconds at a time, and copy the rhythm of the native speech. Not the accent, not the voice, just the flow of it. And listen to one sentence, pause it, and then try to say it with the same stress and timing. Even if your accent stays exactly the same, it's about the stress and the timing. And yes, it feels slightly ridiculous for the first few times. You'll sound a bit like you're doing an impression of someone, maybe, and probably not a very good one, right? First time, we're not very good at things like that. But if you focus on it, it really will pay off, because once your rhythm improves, something interesting happens. People stop focusing on how you sound and they start focusing on what you're actually saying. Clear, natural English that doesn't make people work harder to understand you. Even if you still sound like your native tongue, it's a much better use of your energy at this stage of your language learning journey. All right, so you're collecting phrases, you're adjusting your tone, you're working on rhythm. Now here's where it all comes together. At the B2 level, the biggest block for most learners isn't understanding, it's hesitation. You know what you want to say, but you're not sure if it sounds natural. So you either simplify it or you just don't say it. And this is where AI and structured output work can really, really help you, but only if you use them the right way. And here's what I mean by structured output or forcing output. So instead of just listening to content passively or having casual conversations where you play it safe, tie your speaking directly to language you've just noticed. After listening to something like a podcast or an interview or a video, do one short speaking task based on the phrases in context that you just heard, not the individual vocabulary. Try to go for bigger phrases, like I said earlier, and try to bring them into your practice. So use maybe 3 phrases you noticed, record yourself for about 2 minutes, giving your opinion on the topic, but you've got to try and use at least 3 of those specific phrases you just heard. Or better yet, take a sentence structure you noticed and use it to explain something else entirely different. Then mimic their tone. If they were being diplomatic about a controversial topic, try expressing your own view on something else using that same diplomatic tone. Then, and this is the key, use AI to get your feedback. So record or type your output. You know, you can do, you could type it, or you could dictate it to text, or you could even go on the voice call mode with some AIs like ChatGPT. And then I want you to ask specific questions like, which parts of this sound unnatural? Or how would a native speaker express this idea? Or even, are there any patterns in my mistakes? So you're not looking for random corrections that you don't often make. You're looking for patterns that will help you make that shift quicker. So if AI keeps pointing out the same issue, maybe you're using prepositions incorrectly, or maybe your sentence structure feels translated from your native language. And if you can, use a second AI to collect all of your feedback over time. And then over time, every month or so, ask it, what patterns are you noticing and which ones do you think are the biggest ones for me to focus on? And that can be your roadmap for what to work on next. The goal isn't perfection. It's about awareness, because once you're aware of your patterns, you can start changing them deliberately. And you can do all of this for free. Brilliant. Now, most B2 learners think the solution to improving is more and more input, more podcasts, more videos, more diverse accents. But I'd recommend you do the opposite. Choose one good piece of content per week, like a podcast episode, an interview, a long conversation, and reuse it. So the first time round, just focus on the meaning. What's the main idea that this video or piece of content is trying to get across? And then the second time you go around, notice the phrasing. How are they actually saying things? And write down those phrases. And then the third time you listen to it, pay attention to the rhythm and tone and how you could copy that. And think about your favorite film or song. The more you experience it, the more details you notice that you missed the first time. And language learning works in a similar way. So I encourage you to try and go deep with a piece of content rather than wide and accumulating a lot more information. Right, so we've covered a fair bit in this video so far, but the thing is, none of it works if you don't actually do it consistently. And that's where most people struggle. Not because they chose the wrong method, but because they're relying on motivation. Motivation is actually unreliable. Some weeks you feel inspired, other weeks you won't want to study at all. And that's usually when progress quietly stops. So instead of relying on motivation, build a simple weekly rhythm. Nothing intense, nothing heroic, just something predictable. Every week, you should know that there's one piece of content to listen to and reuse, and there's one short speaking task you're doing using the phrases and structures you noticed, and then you have one moment to reflect or review the patterns and errors maybe that you were making. That's it. No decision making, no overthinking, no fancy study plans that either don't get opened on Excel, or you actually gather dust physically if you've printed it out. But doing a simple structure that you can actually come back to helps your brain relax into it. You're not constantly asking yourself, am I doing the right thing? Or should I be doing more here or less there? You just show up and repeat the process. Frequency is the aim here. Progress from B2 to C1 isn't an obvious dramatic change overnight. It's a quiet consistency that compounds over time. So if you miss a week, that's okay. But if you miss 3 months because you were waiting to feel motivated again, that's not so good. So choose rhythm over intensity every single time, because motivation comes and goes and systems don't. Now, at this point, you might be thinking, okay, I can see how all of this works, but do I actually want to hold all of this in my head and keep on top of all of the suggestions that you've been making? And that's a fair question, because what I've noticed from watching thousands of learners over the years, most people don't get stuck because they choose the wrong method. They get stuck because everything is fragmented. They try one-to-one lessons, but there's no long-term curriculum for that. They buy a self-study course, feel motivated for 2 weeks, and then quietly stop opening it. Or they join a big community, but it's a bit noisy, unfocused, and nobody really knows what they're working on. Or they rely entirely on AI, which is very powerful, but without structure, it becomes a bit like going to the gym and just randomly picking machines. All of those things can help, but on their own, they rarely help people move forward beyond that B2 level. What works much better is combining them properly. AI to explore ideas and practice output, self-study to go deep with specific content and notice patterns, and then a focused community so you're not learning in isolation, and then regular structure so you're not constantly deciding what to do next. All of them working together week after week in a predictable rhythm. And that's the reason I've created my academy, to weave all of those elements together in one place. Some people really enjoy building their own language learning system when they're learning languages. And if you're that kind of person, that's brilliant. And everything that I've covered in this video gives you exactly what you need to make real progress this year. But if you're not that type of person who likes to build your own system, and you still want to have clarity, structure, and consistency, and you don't want your progress to depend on willpower, having all of this designed and delivered by someone with years of experience can make a real difference. And so that's why I'm offering you a special offer right now. So if you wanted to learn more, scan the QR code, click the link, or go to thebritishenglishpodcast.com/academy. But let's bring all of this together. So if you're a B2 learner, this year, getting to a strong C1 isn't about learning more English. It's about using English differently. So I'd like you to think in phrases and collocations, not individual words. Adjust your English for different situations. Focus on rhythm, not accent. And force your output with structured speaking tasks and AI feedback. And then reuse content instead of constantly consuming new material. And then build a simple weekly rhythm that doesn't rely on motivation, that houses all of what I've just suggested. So combine all of those tools properly, or find a system like mine that does it for you. And I'll say one final thing, especially because it's the start of a new year. Right now, you're probably feeling quite motivated. And that's normal. January does that. But the mistake a lot of learners make is using that motivation to pile on too much. They buy everything and start everything at once. And by February, the energy has quietly disappeared. So the best use of New Year energy isn't intensity, it's direction. So use this moment, of added motivation to get clear on a simple weekly learning ritual, something you can actually enjoy and come back to again and again. Then that motivation doesn't have to carry you, because the habits and system that you've built does. And whether you build that system yourself or step into one that already exists, what matters is that you're setting yourself up for progress that lasts longer than just January. And that, I think, is how you want to go from B2 to C1 this year. So, thank you very much for getting to the end of this one. Leave a comment with the idea that stood out most for you, or one that you feel has really helped you that I haven't mentioned yet. But yeah, my name's Charlie. I'm the host of the British English Podcast, and I'll see you in the next one. But until then, have a very happy new year.